Welcome back to Trail and Ultra Running Training. My name is Will France. I'm a running coach, strength coach, and the whole goal of this podcast is to help you run a little better and train a little better so we can have more fun out in the trails. If you like it, please hit subscribe, leave a rating review, share it with somebody, any of the things that tells the robots that somebody likes it, because it pushes it out to more people. The more people that find it, it's all a big snowball rolling downhill. So today, I want to talk about another strength training essential movement. And for those of you watching on Instagram, I realize I haven't fixed the sound thing yet. The fix I thought that was going to work didn't. So sorry, it's quiet. So if we look at these 5 essential movements, a couple episodes ago, I mentioned that we had squat, hinge, push, pull, and core stuff. And today we're going to talk about push. And when you hear about push or press, it is usually in reference to an upper body movement. Technically, we can also do a lower body push day, but that would just be squat. So that's just another term for a squat because we're pushing stuff away from us. So today we're going to talk about push or press, which is going to be upper body stuff where we push stuff away from us, right? So this can be typically, if we think about it, like a bench press, or an overhead press, or an incline bench press, or a dip, or any of these things where the weight or load starts closer to you, and then you press it away from you. Or in the case of a push-up, where you start close to the ground and then press yourself away from the ground, right? So that is going to be our push. Now, if we are trail runners, and we mostly use our legs, you might be wondering, why do we give a shit about shoulder and chest things? And that's a really fair question, if we're going to be honest, because, if we're talking about training, strength training, to get better at running, then it has questionable significance. To some degree, it does really matter, right? Because you are not just a pair of lungs and legs, you are a human. And as a human, things interact with one another. Your muscles depend on other muscles and function of your joints in order to be able to work okay. So if one joint doesn't work well and some muscles don't work well, then other muscles can't work well as a result. And a really good example is your shoulder. If your shoulder isn't able to go through some level of retraction, which would be pulling the shoulder blade down and kind of in towards the back, that is an oversimplified version of what retraction is, but it's fine. We're not here to get in a deep anatomy lecture. If your shoulder is not able to press things overhead and get into this full overhead extension, then that signifies that we have some stuff going on where your rotator cuff might not work well. Your rotator cuff is a set of 4 muscles. I realize it's often this nebulous term thrown about that your shoulder hurts, it must be your rotator cuff. I mean, maybe. Also, maybe not. If you're struggling in the overhead position, it's probably actually more your scapula or your shoulder blade than it is your rotator cuff. But who knows? Even if we have a rotator cuff issue, we should probably know which one of those muscles is causing the problems, because that is how we're going to fix it. Just saying these 4 things are problems. We're going to try to deal with it. They all work in different planes of motion, right? So we should know what's actually causing the issue if we're going to try to fix it. Anyway, that was a small little rant I didn't intend to go on. So if we are seeing a dysfunction in one of the joints, then other things might not work well. Because if your shoulder is here, if I'm rolled forward in the shoulder, my scapula is turned up, and I'm unable to pull it down and engage some stability in the shoulder socket, then I can't use my lat very well. It actually requires that setting in the shoulder for you to be able to really pull well with your lat. And your lat is this big wing muscle here down your back. It is the biggest muscle in your back. And because it is the biggest muscle in your back, it is responsible for a lot of torso stability and your ability to stay upright and, also use your arms. And if we can't use our lat well, then our torso is going to be really unstable. We're not going to be able to stay upright, and we're not going to be able to run very well because we're going to be leaned forward. We're going to end up in this hunched position. if our normal position is this hunch position, when we throw a like trail running pack on our back, which is a little more weight that we're going to have to counterbalance, and we get really tired, so our core doesn't work super well, then we're just going to end up here. And what happens here when we're like hunched forward, like, you know, I was in school because I used to wear like a 40-pound backpack because I never went to my locker. We end up with low back pain, right? And this is one of the things, like one of the complaints you'll often hear a lot from runners is that their low back hurts after a long effort. And some of that can be a result of just a lack of shoulder function. So if we get better shoulder function, then we will be able to use our lat better, we'll be able to stay more upright, we'll be able to use those muscles of our core. So I realize that when we talk about pressing and pushing movements and shoulder function, a lot of runners just completely zone out because they're like, that shit's dumb, it doesn't help me run faster on the trail. But it does, because when you're not in pain, you will run better. Now, that is also in addition to my like general tirade, which I'm probably going to give on all of these things. You're more than just a runner, right? Like, I train a bunch of 70 and 80-year-olds. None of them wish they were weaker. Most of them wish they had done strength training earlier. Some of them have osteoporosis, or at least like borderline osteoporosis. And strength training, moving heavy weights around, is some of the best stuff you can do in order to reduce the likelihood and prevent osteoporosis, because much like your muscles, your bones adapt to stress. So if you put some stress on them, they will get stronger and like relayer themselves. So if we aren't doing strength training and we aren't using the function that we have, we can expect to lose it over time. So if you don't care about being a self-sufficient human being later in your life where you're able to lift things above your head, be that your grandchild or a suitcase into an overhead compartment or whatever have you, then that's fine. But for most people, we don't want to lose that we don't want to lose that function. We don't want to have that like degradation of quality of life as we get older. We just, you know, as humans have no really ability to like project 30 years, 40 years, 50 years into the future. So it's tough to be like, well, you know, but also I don't want to do that now, and that's really far away. So get strong now, stay strong, and you'll have less problems down the line, right? Because you care about stuff other than just running, probably. Anyway, but regardless, do the pressing and pushing stuff because it will help you run better also, but also you care about other stuff. So let's talk about the actual movements. When we look at these, I kind of think about it as a result of a course I took called Prescript, is where your arm is in space in relation to your body. So this can be a little hard to describe on an audio medium. If you're watching this on video, then that's probably going to help a little bit. But we can kind of think of where your arm is in relation to your body to delineate some pressing movements, right? And then we can further talk about whether any of these things matter for you. So overhead, right? We can push a good amount of weight here if we can get into this position. Now, getting into this position can be a bit of a challenge because a lot of people don't have the ability to create this extension while keeping the stability in their like torso and keeping their rib cage and pelvis stacked so that we aren't, you know, projecting into low back stuff, right? Like if we're pressing overhead and all I do is like extend my low back, that's just going to cause a lot of problems and pain. What I really want to do is keep rib cage and pelvis stacked as I create that overhead extension. If I can't do that, we should figure out why. What we shouldn't do is just continue trying to press heavy weights in that plane of motion when I don't have access to it. This is a thing I see pretty literally every day in the gym. Somebody is trying to press heavy dumbbells or heavy barbells over their head in whatever position when their arm doesn't go there. Their arm stops in front of their face when they try to raise it straight up above their head. And ideally, if we just raised your arm up above your head, we would get to ear or behind while being able to keep the torso stable. But a lot of people can't it's impossible for them, based on limitations in movement, to get that far back. So instead of just trying to jam weights into the sky in ranges of motion you don't have, we should try to build the range of motion first and then get that. So some of that reparative motion or movements are going to come to like pull day stuff, but what we're really trying to do, especially overhead, is usually get the scapula to move better. Some of it is going to be getting the upper back to move better, and I promise I'll talk about this in a couple weeks a little more in depth. But if we look at something like a scapular pull-up where you hang from a bar and get your shoulder blades to like pack down and in, and that is going to help with your scapula a little bit, and you'll be able to press a little bit better overhead. So that is the basic idea for overhead stuff. Now, as far as movements actually there, can be dumbbells, can be a barbell, it doesn't really matter what we're pressing overhead. If you do them seated, you will get a little more like growth or strength in your shoulders because you're able to isolate a little better. If you do them standing, it requires a little more core stability. There's good reasons for both. I tend to do more standing stuff because it has a little more crossover to the athletic realm. Most of the people I coach, especially in the running realm, don't want the like Death Star delts or boulder shoulders or whatever goofy name you want to call them. We just want good function and strength so that we can perform well in our life. So you don't need to necessarily do a like seated barbell overhead press or some of these other things. And the extra core stability that you get from doing it in a standing position is actually a benefit rather than a detriment like it would be in the bodybuilding world. So it doesn't matter, press stuff over your head. If you can't, then we can do what would be like a landmine press. So a landmine press, a landmine is a thing that you would attach to like a barbell, or you put it in a couple big plates, and then you put the barbell into the landmine, and then it's just this like 360-degree pivoting arm. It's cool. You don't actually need one of those to do a landmine press. What a landmine press is, in theory, you put it into the landmine and then press here, and it's going to force you out at like an angle because you're not pressing straight up. You don't require that extension. It's going to press out in like a sweeping arcing motion. So you don't require the overhead extension that some people might be lacking. So this is a way to train the shoulder really well while we're also working on rehab and rebuilding shoulder function, right? So either an overhead press if you have access or a landmine press if you don't, while we do the rehab to build shoulders is really good in this overhead position. So next, we can talk about like an incline press. I would say this is anywhere from like 30 to 50 degrees of a bench, right? So you're going to lay back on a bench and you're going to press straight up into the air. And ideally here, we're trying to get chest and shoulder to work. Like depending on the level of your incline, higher incline is going to be more shoulder, lower is going to be more chest. Now, a couple studies, and I don't really base anything off of a couple studies, but it's at least some indication. They seem to show that an incline press has a really similar effect on the like lower fibers of your chest muscle and an increased effect on the upper fibers of your chest muscle. So basically it's just a bonus from a normal bench press. So for a lot of people, if we're just doing pressing motions like one day a week, I will focus more on the incline because it requires a little more shoulder stability. It requires a little less skill from to get into a heavy position on a flat bench press can require a little more skill. So if I'm coaching someone online and they don't care about getting a heavy bench, they just want to be strong in a way that supports them for life, then we're probably going to focus a lot more on an incline bench because they don't need to develop the like intricate skill of a flat bench press, and they can just push an incline. So what we want to do in an incline is really make sure the spine is neutral against the bench. It doesn't need to be pressed. Your low back is going to probably be slightly off, but we also don't want to slide down the bench and just turn it into a flat bench press, because if we're going to do that, let's just make it flat. So I have most people do this somewhere around a 35 to 45 degree, and it tends to be good enough. So I will usually do some kind of bench press on one day if we're training twice a week in the gym, and then I will have them do some kind of overhead press the other day for training twice a week in the gym. Now, flat bench, standard, right? Like, how much do you bench was the question for like all meathead men for the entire 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And it is a good movement. I don't think it has as much carryover to function of daily life as most people. However, if we can't have a decent bench press, then there's probably problems. Doesn't mean you need to work to build it, but also it is some indicator of like ability to engage your scapula and drive through the floor, right? So this can also be a push-up. This is just a press at 90 degrees where your arms are coming directly away from your body. And that, again, can be a push-up, can be a bench press, can be whatever. If you can't do a good push-up, but that's all you have access to, you can elevate your hands onto a box or a chair or a coffee table. That tends to be better than going to your knees because it requires a little more of that like core engagement, right? So if we had the option between elevating your hands or dropping your knees to the ground, I would choose the elevating the hands option. So either is going to help you build towards a push-up. Now, as far as hand position, if we're going to talk about a push-up or a bench press, it's going to be just outside your shoulders, and elbows are going to be flared at like 45 degrees. Tends to be pretty good. That's a pretty good indicator for both a bench or a push-up. Now, if your elbows are more narrow, you're going to get a lot more tricep engagement, and if your elbows are wider, you're going to get a lot more chest engagement. So somewhere in the middle is going to help you get the most, strength, because you're going to split the difference. And if we are able to like maintain that core stability by packing the scapula down and keeping some drive through the feet, then we will be able to bench well without any pain. A lot of people get shoulder pain when they bench because they lose that downward packing of their shoulder blades, and they allow them to come up and it rounds forward. So if we can keep that packing down, then you're going to create a lot more stability and you're going to be able to bench more. So we've gone overhead, 45 up, straight out in front. If we look at this down position of the arm, this would be a decline bench. So if we look at a decline bench press, I don't do this much with people. It can be really good as a movement, as like a corrective, right? So when we breathe, our ribs should move. If our ribs don't move, then this can really help create space to do that. If you're really trying to get a gigantic chest and you just have nothing else to do, and you've already done bench and incline bench and shoulder stuff and whatever, then a decline bench can be really helpful. They've shown that pretty much there's no extra engagement in the chest from a decline bench than from a flat bench press, and it's a more precarious, annoying position to get yourself into. So it feels good for most people, but it doesn't actually create any more progress. So if you like it, great. I have not programmed a like actual heavy decline bench for pretty much anybody ever. I also don't train bodybuilders, so that might be a thing. But if we're looking at the decline position, again, it can be useful as a corrective. I have programmed a really light, like alternating version of this to work on some people's movement mechanics, but not really as an actual like main exercise to get a bunch of work in. And then finally, if we're going to like be right down by the sides, there's not a lot of pressing we're going to do here. But if we think here, where our elbows like back behind us, this is a dip. And we can do a dip on a bench, we can do a dip on a dip bar, we can do a dip on an assisted dip machine. We just should scale it in any way that you are able to while maintaining control. Now, if we look at like the things that go wrong in a dip are very much the same things that go wrong in a bench press. We lose that ability to keep the scapula controlled, and then the shoulders round up and forward, and we end up with too much weight on this joint, and it ends up in pain, right? Because we weren't able to keep it stable. So the biggest cue for the bench press was keep the shoulders down, not necessarily together. Biggest thing for the dip is to keep the shoulders together. They can come up and down as long as they stay together, right? So as we come down into a dip, we're often going to see the shoulders rise a little bit, And then as we press down, the shoulders are going to come away, but they're never going to end up in this like forward rounded position where we lose that scapular control, right? So we want to keep them together as we go through a dip. I really like dips. For a lot of people, they're a huge driver. They enforce good shoulder health. They put your scapula, your shoulder blades, into a really good position. Now, for a lot of people, they're not going to be able to do a full dip, and that's okay. A lot of people will go from a full dip and instead do a bench dip, which, if we're going to do that, we should be really careful because of the positioning of your hands. It is much easier to let your shoulders round forward when we're in this bench dip position. So we should make sure that we're keeping them together. And your range of motion is almost certainly going to be a lot lower. I don't have a lot of this like full rear shoulder extension here. A lot of people who like do yoga can clasp their hands and end up like fully up and behind their back. I don't have that. So for me, if I were doing a bench dip, my hands would need to be a little wider. I would need to maintain stability, really focus on keeping my shoulder blades together as I lowered, and my range of motion would be a little decreased. But we have to remember that we're not really just doing this for like triceps or whatever. We're doing this to also make sure we can control the shoulder blades, right? That's one of the biggest advantages of a dip. So let's not lose that. If you have an assisted dip machine, I really like learning them there because it takes all like stability and wobbliness out of it. We can also do a banded dip where we put a band across the dip bars, put our knees or feet in the band, hold the ends of the bars, and go through the dip. And if you're curious about any of these, the videos are as shorts on my YouTube channel. You can find most of them. Now, if we look at some accessory stuff, if you care. So if we're looking at accessory stuff for chest, that would just be like flies, right? Big, wide. We can find this stretch at the bottom, and this can then pull across. We can do this with either cables or dumbbells. You can do it flat or on an incline. Just find the chest meat and then make it move weight, and that is kind of the purpose of a fly. Don't go so low that your shoulder rolls and you end up with a shoulder injury, but do go as low as you can while maintaining that stability, because flies tend to shine at this like big stretch position at the bottom. And then if we look at like accessory stuff for the shoulder, my favorite / least favorite is a lateral raise. So we're here, we're stable, we pull out to the side. And we really want the shoulder blade to be in like a neutral position back here. It's not pulling back, it's not rounding forward, it's just where it is. Then you pull your arm out to the side. Again, you can do this with cables, you can do this with dumbbell, you can do whatever. It's going to work this like side muscle, the shoulder, your medial deltoid. And it's a really good thing to do for shoulder stability. And then we can also do kind of a rear delt fly as well. I like to do this while bracing my chest on a bench, but there's a bunch of varieties. Again, we're not really here to talk about very specific exercises, but more movement patterns. So if you want to get into the weeds about it, shoot me a message. I love to talk about this stuff. But as far as like accessory movements, we just put the shoulder through a little more range. So we build a little more function in a few different positions other than just this like overhead. And then just for sake of completion, you can also do like an anterior deltoid raise. I don't really program them for anybody. Again, I don't train bodybuilders, and all overhead pressing and incline pressing you do makes a lot of use of that anterior deltoid, so I just don't worry about it. So that is our push. Push, press, whatever you want to call it, is a really useful thing for runners, not just because you're more than a runner, but also because it provides and utilizes good shoulder function, which you need to be able to use your torso well, so that you don't end up with like low back pain or neck pain while we run, right? If we can't use our shoulders well, then we end up with a lot of pain in these other places when we're trying to run because we just aren't a stable human. So if we look at the pressing, like make sure you have access to a range of motion that you're going to use before you try to load it heavy. Again, so like if we can't get into this full extension overhead, then we'll want to use something like a landmine press where we push out in front of ourselves, or a really high incline on the bench. Like we can set the bench at like 80 degrees and press there to make sure that we have that stability and we aren't jeopardizing shoulder function while also trying to improve that range of motion through other exercises. And then just make sure we get a couple planes of motion. I really am favorable to like dips, like 35-degree incline bench press and an overhead press, if I were going to pick a few, because they tend to put your shoulder through a wide range. You hit all the end points while also being able to push really heavy at that like moderately inclined bench. So that is our press day. If you have any questions, shoot me a message. That's what I'm here for. And if you ever need anything, I'd love to chat. This is the kind of stuff I would love to do. So hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll be back soon with another one. Thank you again for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Just a reminder, nothing you hear on this podcast is medical advice, and you should always speak with a medical professional before making changes to your training or your nutrition. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please leave a rating or review. It tells the algorithm robots that people like it, and that means more people will hear it. Or even better, just share it with someone who you think would benefit. If you prefer a video version, head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Group on Facebook, or check out the Mountain Goat Endurance Coaching YouTube channel. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great next run.